turned on your recorder?
Yes, I did. Okay, you could hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You can hear me, I can hear you, we're good. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Mute me.
What?
Mute me.
Okay. All right, so before we even begin, I just want to dedicate this share tonight as a schus refuah shalema for a few chaylim, for Shlomo Zalman ben Mesha, Yisrael Tzvi ben Ruchama Edel Roiza, Menachem Aryeh ben Dina Yehudis, Pesach Shar Chayle Yisrael. Rabban Hashem should give everybody a refuah shalema. Everybody should be zeichet to Yeshua's refuah's parnasa and everything that they could possibly need. Okay, so we've been working our way through the Seder, which is a tremendous amount of fun. And we did last week, we did Kadesh, Orchatz, and now we are up to Karpas. Okay. So Karpas, Karpas is one of those subjects where there's probably thousands and thousands of pages of Torah, written about Karpas. But sometimes, because of that, it's easy to lose sight of the main purpose of Karpas. Why do we eat Karpas? So the Mishnah tells us that by the Seder, we take a vegetable and we dip it. We dip it into something. The Gemara says, why do we do this? The Gemara says, Ki heichi delahave hakera l'tinoikos. The reason we do it is because we want to arouse the curiosity of the children. This is something that was not considered typical, that at the beginning of the Seder, at the beginning of a meal, right away we take something and dip it. And especially by the Seder, we're going to do this twice. We do it by Karpas, and later on, we do it by Maror. So this is something that was done specifically to arouse the curiosity of the children. So whatever other Torah we have about Karpas, whatever beautiful divrei Torah we have about Karpas, and we have hundreds of beautiful divrei Torah, thousands of beautiful divrei Torah on Karpas, and we'll speak through maybe some of them. But we should not lose sight of what the Mishnah and the Gemara tell us, that the reason for Karpas is to arouse the curiosity of the children. So, what we see is that from the very outset of the Seder, right? We had Kadesh, Orchatz, the second step in the Seder is right away a preparatory step for the Karpas. Everything that we said last week about Orchatz, but let's remember, the whole reason we're washing our hands is because we're dipping a vegetable into salt water. So, Orchatz is the second step, Karpas is the third step. Already at the outset of the Seder, we're focused very much on the children. And that's because, and we're going to discuss this in greater depth later in the Shiur, one of the main activities of tonight, if not the main, nowadays that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, we don't bring a carbon Pesach, we have two mitzvahs that are daraisis. There are two mitzvahs that we do tonight, that on the Pesach night, that are min HaTorah. We have achilas matzah, we have eating matzah, which according to the Rambam is a mitzvah say daraisa, even though we don't have a carbon Pesach. And we have the mitzvah of higadet levincha, the mitzvah that we have to go ahead and discuss Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim with our children. So the children and the mitzvah of transmitting the Messiah to the children, that is certainly one of the main highlights of the night. And therefore the Gemara tells us that already from the very beginning of the Seder, we must make it a focus of ours. We must make it a priority to engage the children. And this is something that I think a lot of people have to ask themselves when they go ahead and they plan the Seder, and they go ahead and they figure out how they're going to run the Seder. And this goes into everything from the timing of the Seder to how you're going to seat people around the table and what kind of chairs you're going to allow them to use and pillows and what kind of foods you're going to serve and what kind of glasses you're going to use. Ask yourself, how much do you take the children into consideration? The highlight of the night is the children. The highlight of the night is to be able, not just that the highlight is the children, but to engage the children. We don't want tonight to be a lecture. We don't want to be lecturing to the children. We don't want to be preaching to the children. What we want is we want the children to be engaged. We want the children to be asking us questions. We want them to be thirsty. We want them to want to hear. If they are not in a frame of mind where they want to hear, then our lecturing and our preaching is going to fall on deaf ears. So what we want from them is, we want them to be thirsty. We want them to ask. We want them to want to know. By me, I could remember when I was a child. I'm a child of a Holocaust survivor. So by me, I could remember very much. My father, Olav Shalom, was one of those survivors who was loath to speak about the war. But sometimes by the Seder night, you could get him to speak about the war. Not only was he loath to speak about the war, he was loath to speak about Europe at all. He was loath to speak about his life before the war. But by the Seder night, sometimes you could get him to speak. And especially if by the Seder night we had guests from the previous generation. When I was a young child, sometimes we would have my great uncle and my great aunt. Sometimes we would have my mother's parents. So if there were older people who came from the Heim, people who lived in Europe before the war and went through the war, then it would be even easier to get my father, to discuss war stories, and you had other people around the table to speak also. Now, we were hungry. We were thirsty. We wanted to hear about it. And we knew how precious it was to get him to speak, because usually he wouldn't. So we were engaged, and we asked. And we were all ears, because we wanted to hear. That's what we want from the children tonight. And that's why the Gemara tells us we have karpas, kihechi de lahavi hakera letinoikos, so that we should do something that strikes the curiosity of the children to make the children ask. And I think we have to keep in mind, like I said before, when we plan our Seder, nowadays karpas is not going to have the effect of kihechi de lahavi hakera letinoikos. Our children fully expect karpas, and they have divrei Torah about karpas, and they have lots to say about karpas. So the karpas is not going to do that. So we need to do it in other ways. We need to do things by the Seder that will involve them. We need to pull them in, no matter what it takes. Figure out what foods they like, so that they should be looking forward to Shulchan Aruch. Figure out, give them a nice glass to use by the Dalet Kaisos. Figure out what's going to make them feel chashuv, what's going to make them feel special. Give them a beautiful glass. Get them involved. Tell them they should put another chair next to them, and they should have pillows, and they should have what to lean on, and let them pick out their Haggadah and sit them next to you instead of sitting all the adults, together and the children on the other side of the table. Bring the children around you. And you have to constantly have in your mind, what can I do to involve the children? What can I do to involve them? And if you see that they're drifting off, sometimes if the Seder drags out, so there are some kids for whom it's an adventure. They want to come to shul the next day and they want to say, my Seder went till 3 o'clock in the morning. What time did your Seder go to? But then there are kids who are falling asleep. And there are kids for whom it's too long. So you have to strike a balance. Maybe you have to go faster. Maybe you have to go quickly through part of Maggid. Concentrate on one part one night, concentrate on another part the other night, but don't lose them. Adarabba, quite the opposite. You have to work to rope them in. You have to work to bring them in. So that's the first thing that I would say about karpas. Now, a very famous vort that they say about karpas, the Magen Avram in the Shulchan Aruch brings down from the Maharil that the reason we use karpas is the name of a vegetable. Karpas is not just the name of something we do by the Seder. The word karpas was the name of a vegetable. Of course, we have all sorts of questions which vegetable it was, but that's what karpas is. And the Magen Avram brings from the Maharil that the reason we use the vegetable called karpas is because the letters of karpas can form samach perech. And samach is the numerical value of samach is 60. Perech means hard work, back-breaking labor. So samach perech means that 600,000 Yidden were forced into back-breaking labor. So karpas is something that reminds us of the shibud. It reminds us of the slavery. Okay, and that's why we dip it into salt water, because salt water is reminiscent of tears. So we take this karpas, which reminds us of the slavery, and we dip it into salt water, which is reminiscent of tears that we cried because of the bitter enslavement. Now that's very nice. But one problem that we have is there's a machlokes amongst the poskim. When you eat karpas, should you eat karpas beheseba? Should you lean when you eat karpas or not? The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and others say that you should lean. Others say that you should not lean. But according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Chaverov and his peers, who all say that you should lean by karpas, then it would seem that karpas, if you lean, that means you're eating it derech cherus. You're eating it in a manner where you celebrate freedom. I'm a free man. I'm a rich chashuv person. I eat ba'aseba. And the truth is that just the fact that we're dipping is also a sign of cherus. It's also a sign of luxury and freedom. Somebody who's well-to-do, somebody who has plenty, he could eat and he could have a special appetizer, and he could take his appetizer and he could be busy dipping his appetizer into a condiment. Somebody who has barely what to eat, a slave, doesn't have French fries that he's dipping in ketchup. A slave is eating his dry bread and whatever he has to go together with it. Somebody who's eating in a luxurious manner, he has a dish, a special dish, an appetizer before the main, which is what this karpas is. We're having a dish before we eat the Suda, and we're dipping it into a condiment. So here we have a very strange duality when it comes to karpas. On the one hand, it's samach perach, reminiscent of slavery. We dip it into slave water, into salt water, reminiscent of slavery. But on the other hand, according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, we eat it behaseba, and it's a luxurious style of eating. So which one is it? Is karpas reminiscent of shibud, or is it reminiscent of cherus? I am certainly not the first one to ask this kasha. Many people ask this question, and there are many, many different answers that are given. But the answer that I would like to give is that I think it's not a stira at all. It's not a contradiction at all. The truth is that the only way you could truly appreciate cherus, the only way you could truly appreciate freedom, is if you could at least begin to understand the opposite of freedom. A slave, somebody who was a slave, he can appreciate freedom. Somebody who went through the horrors of the Holocaust, he could appreciate being free. He could appreciate being liberated. Somebody who never experienced the challenges, then freedom is taken for granted. Cherus is taken for granted. Baruch Hashem, at least so far, the Rebbeinu Shalom should have Rachmanis, it should go weiter. People of my generation and later, you grew up here in the United States, so what do you know from hardship? What do you know from nebuch, from slavery, from oppression? You don't know anything about it. So do you truly have an appreciation what it means to have cherus, or do you take cherus for granted? Until about this time last year, who knew what it meant to have a shortage? I remember when I was learning Hilchas Pesach together with my Dirshu Mr. Brura Chabura. So around this time last year, I was learning Hilchas Pesach with them. And we were learning the halachas of what you could make matzah out of and what you can't make matzah out of, and what you do in a Shasat Chak and what you don't do in a Shasat Chak. And I remember I said then, we don't know what it means to worry about these things. We have everything. What's the problem? You want to use celery for karpas, you could get it. You want to use potatoes, you could get it. You want to use parsley, you could get it. You want to use a radish, you could get a radish. Matzah, you want square matzah, you want round matzah, you want oat matzah, you want spelt matzah, you want whole wheat matzah. Whatever it is, you could get it. Wine, you want sweet wine, dry wine, low alcohol wine, high alcohol wine. You want yayin mavushal, you want yayin she'ena mavushal. Whatever it is, you could get it. You sit down and you make your menu and you decide, should I have meat, should I have chicken, should I have duck, should I have turkey, should I have veal, should I have rib, should I have shoulder, should I have chuck, should I have whatever you want. It's all available. Until last year when it wasn't. Last year suddenly they didn't know what matzah they were going to use. I know people who used machine matzah who would have never eaten machine matzah. They come from Hasidic background. They wouldn't let machine matzah in their house. Last year, they used machine matzah for the matzah shel mitzvah because that's what they were able to get. They weren't able to get. I don't have to remind people about shortages of things like toilet paper. I mean, who would imagine? We don't, Baruch Hashem, we don't know what it means. So could you truly appreciate the richness that you have? Can you truly appreciate the cherus that you have if you never lived through the opposite? Now, we don't want to live through the opposite. We certainly don't want to live through the opposite. The Rebbeinu Shalom should take care of us. We should never have to live through the opposite. But you can't truly appreciate the cherus that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives you without first at least making an attempt to try and appreciate the shibud. And that's why we have the duality of the karpas. Because we need to have a zecher for the Samach Perech. We need to think about the fact that 600,000 people were pressed into brutal slavery. We need to dip into the salt water because we have to think about the tears. We have to acknowledge and remember the fact that there were tears, that there were bitter tears. Only then can we appreciate the richness and the luxury of having an appetizer that we dip into a condiment that we eat, bahaseba derech cherus. So at the outset of the Haggadah, the Baal Haggadah gives us a mitzvah of karpas where we have to do both. We have to have a zecher for the shibud and a zecher for the cherus. And the truth is that I think this is something, it's a concept that we have to take into our daily lives. It's a concept that we have to take beyond the Pesach Seder. You know, it always strikes me. I think the first time it came to my mind was on a Rosh Hashanah. I think I was in 9th grade. So I think I was 13 years old. And it was Rosh Hashanah. And it was the first Rosh Hashanah that I was spending in Yeshiva Staten Island. And in Yeshiva, on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they give about an hour and 10 minutes for brachas, karbanos, and psuki de zimra. So you have a lot of time to say psuki de zimra. And I really made it my business, I remember on that Rosh Hashanah, to stand by psuki de zimra and daven psuki de zimra slowly. Really saying every word slowly, carefully, and trying to think about the meaning of the words. And I remember I got up to Nishmas. And in Nishmas, I remember it struck me. We say in Nishmas like this. I'll read it to you from a siddur. We say in Nishmas, we say, Ve'ilu pinu mole shira kayam. If our mouths were full of song to the Rabbeinu Shalom, as full as the sea, Ulashaynenu rina kaman galov, and our language would be full of rina, of song and praise, like the waves. V'sifseisenu shavach keberchave rakia, and our lips would be able to express praises like the expanse of the shamayim. Ve'einenu me'iros, and our eyes would be enlightened, kashemesh v'chayareach, like the sun and the moon. V'yodenu prusais kedishrei shamayim, and our hands would be able to be spread out like the eagle flies across the face of the world. V'raglenu kalais ka'ayolos, and we would be able to run swiftly like a deer. Ein anachtu maspikim l'hodos l'cha Hashem Elokeinu v'lekev Yiseinu. We would not be able to sufficiently praise you, Rabbeinu Shalom. And now I'm going to skip a little bit here. V'ribe rivavais pa'amim hatovais nisim nefloi sha'asisa, for the tens of thousands of chasadim and nisim and neflois sha'asisa im aviseinu v'imanu, that you did with our forefathers and with us. And now, the Mechaber of Nishmas starts to enumerate kindnesses that the Rabbeinu Shalom does with you. Milifanim mimitzrayim galtanu. In days of old, he redeemed us from Mitzrayim. Mi beis avodim pidisanu. He redeemed us from slavery. Barav zantanu. He fed us during times of hunger. Besava kilkaltanu. During times of plenty, he gave us plenty. Mecherev hitzaltanu. From the sword, he saved us. Midever milatetanu. From deadly plagues, he helped us escape. Mechaloim roim v'rabim v'ne'emanim delisanu. From terrible sicknesses, he saved us. Look at all of these kindnesses that we list in Nishmas. Now, you might say to yourself, well, did the Rabbeinu Shalom save me from all of these things? And the answer is yes, he did. Yes, he did. The Rabbeinu Shalom saved me from the sword. When did the Rabbeinu Shalom save me from the sword? Well, I'll tell you one time. My father was a survivor of Auschwitz. If my father, Chas v'Chalila, would have succumbed in Auschwitz, I wouldn't be here today. So I was saved from the sword. I was also saved from deadly plagues. I know that when my father, Alav Shalom, had his final illness, they ran blood tests on him, and they came to him and they asked him, when did you have typhus? When did you have cholera? When did you have, all these sicknesses? And he laughed. And he said, listen, in 1945, I had everything that you could have. Now, right now, I could say, and we could all say, Mechaloim ram v'rabim v'ne'emanim delisanu. The Rabbeinu Shalom saved us from terrible illness. Over the course of the past year, if we're here, we'll make a bracha by the Seder, Shehechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Have kavana when you make that bracha. We'll make a bracha, Shehechiyanu, the Rabbeinu Shalom kept us alive. V'kiyamanu, and he supported us. V'higiyanu lazman hazeh, and he allowed us to reach this time. We all saw over this last year, Chaloim rabim v'ne'emanim, terrible illness. So there are so many things that the Rabbeinu Shalom has saved each and every one of us. Now, if you look at me and you'll say, well, I'm not a children of survivors. Yes, you are. Maybe not survivors of World War II, but somewhere in your descendants, how about the Crusades? How about the Cossacks? How about pogroms? Go further back. How about the Churban? The terrible destruction of the Churban. If you're alive now, that's because you survived. Your ancestors survived. Wherever we've been through this long, bitter gullus, every one of us has ancestors that have survived terrible deprivation, war, oppression, and the horrors of Gullus. Those are all kindnesses that the Rebbeinu Shalom has done for us. But we don't appreciate them if we don't acknowledge the fact that we were saved. So we can't appreciate the goodness until we could take a look and acknowledge the fact that it wasn't always this way. Appreciate the richness that you have here now. Appreciate it by thinking of the times that Klal Yisrael didn't have it. The times that your ancestors didn't have it. So the lesson of karpas, from this duality of karpas, is a lesson that we have to take beyond the Seder, and we have to take it into our lives throughout the year to have true appreciation to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Okay, that's karpas. Yakats. What do we do by Yakats? So Yakats, I always say, is one of the highlights of the Seder for the children, because by Yakats, we create the Afikomen. By Yakats, probably most of us use 3 matzahs by the Seder. So we take the middle matzah and we break the middle matzah into 2 pieces. The smaller piece stays on the ka'ara. It stays in front of us on the Seder plate, in between the 2 other matzahs. And that's the prusa, that's the broken piece of matzah that we're going to say the Haggadah over. And that's the piece of matzah that at least the leader of the Seder, that's the piece of matzah that we're going to eat for our matzah shel mitzvah. For moitzi matzah, that's the matzah that we eat. The middle matzah, the smaller piece of the middle matzah by the Seder. The bigger piece from the Yakats gets put away for the Afikomen. Now, again, I talk about the children. I use Yakats as a highlight to draw the children into the Seder. My kids, my grandkids, they already know, they already expect it. They're all running over to me as I make this whole big deal about not being able to break the matzah. You know, especially my matzah. I have to tell you, the bakery I get my matzah from, it's thick matzah. It's not thin matzah. None of this flimsy shatzer matzah, you know, for me. So I take that matzah and I make a whole thing. I can't break it. I need the kids to help. I need them to come help me break the matzah. So the kids come and they're going to help me break the matzah. And then I break the matzah into 2 pieces. And you know, when you take a round matzah and you break it into 2 pieces, each one is a smiley face. So I hold up the matzah in front of my face, and which one is the bigger piece? I can't tell. I need you to tell me. Is it big? Is it small? Why? To some people, it could look like silliness. It is silliness. I'm being silly. You know why I'm being silly? I'm being silly because it brings in the kids. And it creates memories. Don't belittle the idea of making memories. I will tell you that by my Rebbe, Reb Ruven soll sein gesund und stark, by his Seder, when he gets up to Chad Gadya, all of the Einiklach and everything crowd around, and they sing Chad Gadya, and they make sound effects for every one of the characters in Chad Gadya. Reb Ruven is usually the money. You know, the Zabin Abba betrays Uzeh. We talk about the Chad Gadya that my father bought for 2 zuz. So they go, betrays Uzeh, and Reb Ruven makes money noises. He'll go clink, clink, like you're throwing money into a pushka, or he'll make a cash register noise. Nowadays, our cash registers, you know, in the old days, you know, the ring, or nowadays he'll go beep, 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 you know. He'll make cash register noise, he'll make clinking money sounds. Another one will go bah for the sheep. Another one will go woo, woo for the fire engine. So, silly, right? It makes memories. And memories, even silly memories, they transfer from generation to generation, and they remember that they had a Seder. And they remember the fun of the Seder. and they remember the laughter of the Seder, and they remember Zaidi from the Seder. And when they remember Zaidi from the Seder, they remember the minhagim of Zaidi. And they remember the davening of Zaidi. And they remember Zaidi giving them brachas. And they remember Zaidi speaking about the 10 makkos. And they remember Zaidi eating the matzah. And they remember Zaidi in his kittel making haseba. All of this is critically important. Especially, remember, we're in Gullus. We like to think that we know that everything is going to be okay, what's going to be with the future generations, but you don't know. You don't know. So you want to make memories, and you want to make memories in the youngest children also. You want to give them things that they're going to remember. So Yakats, when we break that matzah, another opportunity to bring in the kids. Now, I do want to mention just a halacha point, which is I think this is something that escapes many people. They think that the matzahs that are on the ka'ara are like only there for decorative purposes. You know, we have a Seder plate. So one of the things that goes on the Seder plate is the matzah, because we eat matzah by the Seder. Ideally, that middle matzah is the matzah that you're supposed to use for your motzi matzah and later for your afikomen. That's why there's this whole thing about stealing the afikomen and giving the kids a gift for the afikomen, because you want that piece of matzah back. You want that matzah. Now, really, it's a machlokes rishonim. See, the Rashbam, I'll just give you a little bit of a background in what's at work here in the halacha. According to the Rashbam, who was a Rishon in Masechtas Pesachim, according to the Rashbam, the eating of the afikomen is an extension of the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach night. He holds that the mitzvah of eating matzah incorporates the matzah shel mitzvah that we eat before Shulchan Aruch and the matzah that we eat by the afikomen. So according to the Rashbam, both the afikomen and the motzi matzah, both are supposed to come from that middle matzah. According to other Rishonim, it's not necessarily that way. According to the Rambam, the afikomen is really a separate mitzvah. So according to the Rambam, it's not so critical that it come from that middle matzah. So if you want to be a wise guy, when the kid steals the afikomen, you can tell him, I'm going to paskin like the Rambam. I don't need your matzah. I'll take a different matzah. Anyway, a question that I haven't seen brought up much is that why is it that we prepare the afikomen now? Now again, according to the Rashbam, it's not such a strong kasha. According to the Rashbam, I'm preparing the afikomen now because I need to break the middle matzah now. Why do I need to break it now? I need to break it now because the next thing we're going to come to in the Haggadah is going to be Maggid, where we discuss Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the mitzvah of Maggid has to be done over a broken piece of matzah. Lechem she'oinen olav dvarim harbe. We call the matzah halach ma'anya. There's two pshatim in lach ma'anya. One is it's the poor man's bread. A poor man doesn't have a whole loaf. A poor man only has a broken piece. And also halach ma'anya, lechem she'oinen olav dvarim harbe. It's bread that we speak a lot of words over. What does that mean? We discuss Yetzias Mitzrayim. We speak about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim over a broken piece of matzah. So we need to break that middle matzah now. So we should have a broken piece of matzah. And according to the Rashbam, the afikomen has to come from that broken piece. So according to the Rashbam, there's no kasha. Why are we preparing the afikomen now? We have to prepare the afikomen now. But according to the other Rishonim, why are we preparing the afikomen now? I think that there are two answers that I would give to that. One is, I remember a very beautiful mashal, a parable or an analogy that my Rebbe, one of my Rebbeim, my Manal, when I was in elementary school, when I was in Yeshiva Ketana, my Manal was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful special person by the name of Rabbi Elias Schwartz, Zechet Tzadik Levracha, the Manal of Yeshiva Teres Emes in Borough Park for decades. He was also the Rebbe of Rabbi Yerucham Olshen, Zal Zayin Gesund, the Yeshiva of Lakewood. Rabbi Yerucham Olshen was a Teres Emes boy, and Rabbi Yerucham Olshen was maspid Rabbi Schwartz by his levaya. And I remember he pointed to the Aron and he said, Reb Eliezer. And then he paused and he closed his eyes and he thought for a minute. And then he went, no. Not Reb Eliezer. Rabbi Elias. And then he looked around the room and he said, could you imagine a manal nowadays, Elias? Imagine a manal of a prominent yeshiva ketana in Brooklyn or in Lakewood or in Muncie, and imagine his name would be Elias. You know, look at him, some kind of modernish person over here. Who is this Elias? It's an English name. But then Rabbi Yerucham Olshen looked around the room and he said, but Rabbi Elias taught the Talmidim Yiras Shamayim. I don't know how many Menalim nowadays teach Yiras Shamayim. They teach Chumash, they teach Mishnayos, they teach Gemara. They make a big deal about how many pages they turn. But do they teach Yiras Shamayim? Rabbi Elias Schwartz taught Yiras Shamayim. So he told us once in a Musar Shmuz how many yeshiva ketanas have Musar Shmuzim. We had a Musar Shmuz from Rabbi Schwartz every Thursday. We had a Musar Shmuz. So he said once in a Musar Shmuz, he said, you know, the police, if they pull over somebody who's driving erratically and they're afraid that he might be under the influence, so nowadays they give him a breathalyzer test. You know, nowadays they have a machine. Sir, breathe into the machine. In the olden days, before they had the breathalyzer, they took you to the side of the road and they said, walk in a straight line. If you could walk in a straight line, the assumption was you're not drunk. If you can't walk in a straight line, if you're zigzagging, you're a drunk. Then they take you in. So Rabbi Schwartz said there were two people who were pulled over. They were both asked to walk in a straight line. One of them said, all right, I'm going to be very careful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look down at my feet. And I'm going to take one foot and I'm going to make sure I put it right in front of the other foot, so that it should be in a straight line. And then when I move the back foot, I'm going to make sure it goes right in front of the other foot. And I'm going to watch my feet. I'm going to look down at the ground and watch my feet. So Rabbi Schwartz, and I didn't try, I think I did try it at the time, but you'll excuse me, it's a long time ago. Rabbi Schwartz, I remember, said that the fact is, if you try that, usually a righty ends up curving to the right and a lefty ends up curving to the left. Because when you look down at your feet and you try to line up one with the other, it's not perfectly straight. Your whole frame of reference is only the 2 feet. And you find that you curve and you end up not walking in a straight line. The other fellow did something else. What he did was, he said, officer, you want me to walk in a straight line? He took a rock and he put a rock down 10 feet away from him. And he kept his eye on the rock. And he walked in a straight line to the rock. And he walked in a straight line. The message Rabbi Schwartz was giving us was, you have to have a goal and you have to have your eye on the goal. If you have a goal and you keep your eye on the goal, you'll go in a straight line. You'll always ask yourself, if I'm going to do this now, is it going to bring me closer to my goal, or is it going to take me away from my goal? And you'll make sure to only do things that bring you to your goal. One of my involvements is every year Yeshiva Staten Island makes a very beautiful Bikiyas Malava Malka, where we celebrate the boys who finished the Masechta that the yeshiva is learning that year. I'm the MC by the Malava Malka. So I always make the point. I always say, the yeshiva has, Kenan Hara, let's say 125 Bachar. I say, tonight we're going to call up on the stage 50, 60, Bacharim, we're going to call up on the stage. But there are a lot of Bacharim who aren't going to get called up on the stage. Every single one of them wants to be up on that stage. Every single one of them wants to finish the Masechta. Tonight, in that room, if they could come and they could pay $25, $50, $100 to earn a place up on that stage, they would gladly pay it. If you told them that if they stayed up the whole night tonight, they get up on that stage, they'd stay up. If you tell them that they have to learn a Ritzifus Seder and they have to learn for 4 hours straight, they'll learn 4 hours straight to get up on that stage. But what they don't do is do it every day for a year. That they don't do. That they didn't find within them to be able to do it day in, day out over the course of the year. And that's what it takes to finish the Masechta. But I tell them, if you want to do it next year, then hold up tonight as a goal. Make it a goal. Make a Kabbalah that I'm going to get up here next year. And then every day ask yourself, what do I need to do to get to that goal? They say about Rav Gifter, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, that when Rav Gifter was a bacher in yeshiva, Rav Gifter was the great Rosh Yeshiva of the Telz Yeshiva. They say that when he was a bacher in yeshiva, he had pictures of Gedolim up by his bed. On the wall, he had pictures of Gedolim. And then he had an empty spot. And by that spot, he wrote, "Why not me?" You see, Rav Gifter set as a goal when he was young that he wanted to be like them. He wanted to be like one of those Gedolim. That was his goal. And he never diverged from that goal. We break the matzah by Yakats, and we put away half of it for the Afikomen. We don't need that piece of matzah until 3-4 hours from now, at the end of the Seder by the Afikomen. But we prepare for it now. Now we prepare. We're already preparing for the end of the Seder. And we have to prepare now for the whole Seder. Don't walk into the Seder blind. We have to prepare now for the Seder. And at the Seder, we have to have in our mind what the end of the Seder is going to be like. We have to have in our mind, what do we want to get out of the Seder? What do we want the Seder to accomplish? What do we want everybody to feel like at the end of the Seder? We want it to be inspiring. We want it to be enlightening. We want it to be enriching. There's a beautiful minhag to say Shir Hashirim at the end of the Seder. Shir Hashirim. Shir Hashirim is a Megillah of the great love between Klal Yisrael and the Rabbeinu Shalom. We want to come to a place at the end of the Seder where we want to sing Shir Hashirim, where we want to sing about the great love that we have for the Rabbeinu Shalom and that the Rabbeinu Shalom has for us. That's where we want the Seder to take us. And we have to prepare for that at the beginning. That's what we have to have in mind as the leader of the Seder. You have to constantly be asking yourself through the Seder, am I doing it right? Should I tweak it a little bit? What should I speak about? What should I tell them? What should I say? What do I want to think about? And this goes for life throughout the year also. To have a goal, to grow in Torah, to grow in mitzvahs, to grow in Yerushalayim, to become closer to the Rabbeinu Shalom. We have to set these as goals and then work towards those goals. There's also a beautiful vart on Yakats that I saw from Rav Shimon Schwab Zechet Tzaddik Levracha. Rav Shimon Schwab had a very special, I find a tremendous amount of heart and warmth and emotion in a lot of Rav Shimon Schwab's Torah. Rav Shimon Schwab writes a fascinating thing by Yakats. I think he quotes it from his father. He says that by Yakats, we break the matzah in two, and the smaller piece stays on the ka'ara. When that small piece of matzah stays on the ka'ara, what company is that small piece of matzah keeping? So he says it's in the company of maror, bitterness. To those of us who use the ka'ara of the Ramah, I use the Ramah's ka'ara, the Gruz ka'ara. The meimelach, the salt water that you dip the karpas in, is on the ka'ara. That's bitterness. Of course, we have the zraya and the beitza that represent karbanos, avodas Hashem. We have the karpas is on the ka'ara. Says Rav Shimon Schwab, the small piece of matzah that's on the ka'ara, that represents olam hazeh. It represents life in this world. This world, there are ups and downs. There's the bitterness of maror. There's the sweetness of charosis. There's avodas Hashem, the zraya, the beitza. There's tears of meimelach. There's luxury of karpas. That's what this world is. There's a cycle, and there's ups, and there's downs, and there's twists, and there's turns. That's the small piece of matzah. That's olam hazeh. But you should know that there's a big piece of matzah. The small piece of matzah of olam hazeh is only a tuffle. That's only secondary. The ikr, the main thing, is the big piece of matzah. The big piece of matzah is not on the ka'ara. Where is the big piece of matzah? I don't know. It's hidden. We hide it. We can't see it. But we know it's there. The Mesilas Yesharim tells us, it's Chazal. Chazal tells us, Olam hazeh is daimel leproizdar liftei traklin. This world is only the entranceway. It's only the hallway. It's transient. It's something that we pass through. And while we're passing through it, what we do over there is we prepare ourselves. Liftei traklin. Haskein atzmecha beproizdar. Prepare yourself in the proizdar. Prepare yourself in olam hazeh before you get to the traklin, before you get to the palace of olam haba. Olam haba you can't see. You don't know what it looks like. You don't know what it is. It's hidden. But we know that it's there. And we know that it's the bigger piece. We know that it's the ikr, not the tuffle. And we know that the afikaimen has to be eaten al hasoiva. You eat the afikaimen when you're already satiated. Satiated. Between the matzah and the maror and shulchan aruch and everything else and the wine. You're full by the time you eat the afikaimen. That's what olam haba is supposed to be. Olam haba is only nechal al hasoiva. We only get to eat. We only get to partake of olam haba if we satiate ourselves with Torah and mitzvahs first. If we fill ourselves up with Torah and mitzvahs in the proizdar, in the entranceway, in the antechamber, then we could enjoy the traklin. Then we could enjoy the olam haba la'asad lavai. We could enjoy the schar that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives us in the next world. So I hope that this gives us some food for thought. We're now through Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas, Yakats. And next we're going to come to Maggid. I don't think I'm going to start to discuss Maggid now. I think we'll hold Maggid off for next week. I'll just tell you that Maggid is one of the ikrim of the Seder. V'higada tolavincha, the main thrust of the night, to give over to the next generation, to be Maggid. You know, the famous kasha, the mitzvah of Higada tolavincha is the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. In the Sefer HaChinuch, it's the 21st mitzvah listed by the Chinuch. It's a mitzvah sasei daraisa. According to those opinions that the mitzvah of Achilas Matzah is a mitzvah min HaTorah, a daraisa, on Pesach night, Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is also a daraisa. It's a mitzvah sasei min HaTorah to discuss the miracles of Yitzias Mitzrayim on the Seder night. The kasha is asked, I don't understand. We have a mitzvah every single day. We have a mitzvah say daraisa of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim. We have to mention, we say it in Kriya Shema, we have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim and we have to remember Yitzias Mitzrayim every single day of the year. So what's different about the Seder night? What's this special mitzvah by the Seder night? There are many different terutzim that are given, but the answer of the Minchas Chinuch says, what do you mean? There's a very critical difference between the mitzvah every other day of the year and the mitzvah of Sipur by the Seder. Every other day of the year, you have a personal mitzvah. You need to fulfill the mitzvah of mentioning and remembering Yitzias Mitzrayim. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God, Asher Eitzesi Eschem Me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of Mitzrayim, L'yois Lachem L'Elikim, to be for you a God. We say that in Kriya Shema every day, 2 times. We say it by Shacharis, we say it by Ma'ariv. And really, you should have in mind, when you say the 3rd parsha of Kriya Shema, you should have in mind, I'm going to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim. That's every day of the year. Pesach, you have a new mitzvah. Pesach, the mitzvah is not for you to remember it for yourself. Pesach, the mitzvah is v'higada tolavincha, to give it over to the next generation. That's the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim on Pesach. To transmit it, not to know it for yourself, to transmit it to others. And that's going to be the section of the Seder of Maggid. And Mirza Hashem will discuss Maggid next week. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah, for joining me in the preparation for Pesach and for the Pesach Seder. Rabban Hashem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnasa to all those in need. Rabban Hashem should be Megan, should protect Gans Klal Yisrael. Nobody should be ill. Nobody should be unwell. We should only hear Besuras Tavais. We should only hear Simchas. We shouldn't hear about any tsaras. We should be able to go into Yom Tov b'simcha. We should be able to daven with minyanim. Last year, Pesach, I davened b'yechidus the whole Pesach. I didn't hear any Kriyas HaTorah last year. I sang Hallel myself, but I didn't hear a Hallel in Shul. This year, we should be able to have Hallel. We should be able to have Kriyas HaTorah. We should be able to have Tefillah B'tzibur. We should be able to have Shiurim. We should be able to have Daf Yomi Shiurim. We should be able to have Torah in the Bismedrash. And it should be a Yom Tov that's not dampened by any Besurais Reis, by hearing about Tsaras. We should only hear about Simchas. And it's Nisan. It's the Zman Geula. The Rabban Shalom should send the Bias Gail Tzedek B'mehera v'yamenu. We still could be Zeicha to a carbon Pesach. We still could be Zeicha to real Matzah Shal Mitzvah. Imagine eating a carbon Pesach in Yerushalayim, al matzahs and meroirim yechlu, with the dam being nizrak on the mizbeach, with the going in, Klal Yisrael going into the Heichel, going into, not into the Heichel, into the Azara, Klal Yisrael going into the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash in 3 shifts. The nisim that we saw in the Azara, one of the great nisim that we saw in the Azara in the Beis Hamikdash, we learn out from a pasuk that Klal Yisrael was divided into 3 groups. for the bringing of the Karban Pesach. So one group went in and filled up the Azara, and they closed the gates, and they did one run of bringing the Karban Pesach. Then, when that shift was finished, they brought in a second shift, and then they brought in a third shift. 3 shifts in the Azara held Gans Klal Yisrael. That's a tremendous nace. Not only that, it says that when they heard the Shem HaMefarish, they bowed down. So it says that Oimdim Tzfufim, when they were standing, it was crowded. When they were standing one on top of the other. Umishtachavim Ravachim. But then when they had to bow down, they bowed down and there was plenty of room. So imagine we should be Zaycha to come to the Beis HaMikdash. We should be Zaycha to have a Karban Pesach. Al Matzei Simarorim Yechlu, to experience the Nisim of the Beis HaMikdash. We should be Zaycha to the Geula Shlema. B'mehera v'yameinu. Amen.
Thank you. Excellent.